West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
We would like to begin today by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and was previously occupied by the Huron, Wendat, and Seneca First Nations. This land is covered by Treaty 20 and the Williams Treaties of the 1923 and lies within the lands of the Protected Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement of 1701, an Indigenous citizenship law made between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. I practiced that, you know. These nations in 1701 that extends from Montreal to Fort Erie. One of the core values within the idea of a dish with one spoon is that those who use the land should not abuse the land. Individuals and groups should only take what they need from the land so that there will be a healthy, long-term, sustainable environment. All participants in the treaty agreement had the responsibility to ensure that the dish would never be empty by taking care of the land and all of the living belongings in it. Thus, a big dish, only one spoon, shared among all parties in the agreement. A big welcome to everyone sharing our gathering dish this morning. My name is Anne, and I'm joined by our music maker, Scott Kearns. Babette is away with a lovely family gathering in London, Ontario. We're also joined by our technical crew, led by Aidan, those in the hall, and those we all see gathering together on screen in what I like to see as a beautiful mosaic which spans oceans and many time zones, east and west. I'm also excited to welcome our special guest speaker, Mel Burns, who is bringing perspective to building community in these times when talking to people can be hard. So welcome, everyone. And at the end of the readings, we customarily add the phrase, offered as wisdom for the journey, and we invite you to respond with the phrase, may we walk in its light. Of course, this is an invitation to participate only if you wish to do so. The first reading is from Brené Brown in her work titled Braving the Wilderness. Who doesn't like a good quote from Brené Brown? People are hard to hate close up. Move in. Speak truth to bullshit. Be civil. Hold hands with strangers. Strong back. Soft front, wild heart. Second reading is from Isabel Wilkerson in her work titled Cast, the Origins of Our Discontents. It is also tempting to vilify a single despot at the site of injustice, when in fact it is the actions, or more commonly inactions, of ordinary people that keep the mechanism of the caste running. The people who shrug their shoulders at the latest police killing. The people who laugh off the coded put-downs of marginalized people shared at the dinner table and say nothing for fear of alienating an otherwise beloved uncle. Offered as wisdom for the journey. May we walk
in its light.
Welcome, Mel Burns. Mel has a background in social work and is currently at the thesis stage of a master's degree with a focus on religion, peace, and justice. And as I'm reading your bio, Mel, I'm looking at you on the screen in front of us. Mel has led a wide range of staff both in case management and programming for refugees and newcomers to Canada, and in New Zealand in an Indigenous organization providing support to youth beneficiaries and young parents. Mel has experience facilitating workshops on a variety of topics related to social work and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Mel believes that all life is created equal and that each human we encounter has the ability to teach us a unique and valuable truth, if only we take the time to pause and pay attention. Mel is a proud member of the queer community, a regular tree hugger, a donut connoisseur, and a lover of continuous learning. Mel comes to us from St. John's, New Brunswick. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you so much. I am pleased to be here. And for some of you may know, I had planned to be here well, about a month ago, just over a month ago, and then the woes of Air Canada interrupted many a plan during the biggest snowstorm I think I've ever seen hit Toronto. I was in Toronto that week, and I remember taking the taxi from the airport originally and looking around, and I was talking to the taxi driver and said, "Is this the 90s?" I haven't seen Toronto like this since Snowmageddon of 1999, I think. There was just snow everywhere and it was sticking around. So that caused some havoc at the airport, which has some changes of plans. So I am very grateful for the flexibility and the kindness of your organizers to help me rearrange the schedule and get back on board so I could talk to you all. I want to just acknowledge that, yes, I'm in St. John, New Brunswick, which is the traditional lands of the Wabanaki Confederacy and the Wolastoqey people. The eastern part of Canada is covered by the Peace and Friendships Treaties and is unceded and unsurrendered territory to this day. And so I like to acknowledge that because that affects our work and it affects our worldview of the world around us being on stolen land that our treaty did not even cover. Back when John asked me to speak, we had a conversation, I think, in early November. So for context, if you remember way back to early November, between then and now, we talked about wanting to have a conversation about building bridges in an era of polarization. And since that conversation, we've had Trump be elected, our prime minister step down, a new Liberal election race, and then a new prime minister elected, Trump sworn in, and a new election called. So if we're talking about political polarization, I think it's a hot topic right now, even more so than it might have been in the blissful days of ignorance of early November. And I suppose it's more relevant now than ever. It's always been relevant. Polarization has been something that our organization, I work for Canadian Friends Service Committee, which is the service arm of the Quakers in Canada, have been talking about for years, and many organizations, particularly those in the peace world, have been talking about the dangers and the fears around our increasingly polarized, especially online spaces. And so we wanted to talk about bridge building, and my approach to this is I really fully understand the common use of a bridge building metaphor. I think it's something we talk about in many spaces. But I have this inner defiant teenager that wants to just deliberately misunderstand things sometimes so that I can play with them. And so when I think about building bridges, I wanted to kind of play with it a little bit and see if there's a way that we can tweak that metaphor or adjust it to help us move into a direction that maybe freshens up our perspective on how we can actually build community in our spaces. I'll be honest, I'm also hoping that there's no transportation architects in the room because I am not an expert on actual road design definitions. So while I throw these metaphors around, please be gentle with me if you are an expert, because you may cringe on these things. So let's get literal and metaphorical for a moment together, if we can, if you put up with me. I want to ask, and this is an audience participation moment, what are the physical functions of bridges? Just this can be a shout out for West Hill, or you can just unmute on Zoom. What is the physical function of a bridge? Why do we have a bridge?
Get you across.
To get across, yep.
To get from here to there.
Get from here to there,
That
yeah.
was to get from here to there, yeah.
Yeah. Great.
To join two places.
Yep. Yeah, to connect something that's too far away, yeah.
Business reasons for correct economic reasons.
Yes, sufficient. Yeah, bridges can be efficient.
To span a divide.
Span a divide. Yeah. All right, so we're on the same page then with your understanding of bridges. I'm glad. So for a bridge, what I heard you saying and what I thought of for myself, it's an efficient route. It's an efficient route from A to B, right? It helps us avoid tricky obstacles like water, ravines, complex road systems. For those of you that are living in the city, bridges sometimes go over top of other bridges or other roads as a way to skip over some of the complexity of trying to merge roads. And they connect 2 points in a metaphorical sense that seem to be a distance from each other. So when we talk about it in the metaphor, usually it's about connecting 2 people or 2 points that are at some difference or distance from each other, either ideologically or if for some reason. So what if I told you that the best way to combat polarization is not actually to build a bridge, but instead to rethink our metaphor and think about building a boulevard? Bridges are these incredible feats of engineering, and for many of the reasons we just said out loud, but they do something that I think is actually not very good for community building. They pass over things. They allow us to bypass obstacles efficiently without ever having to spend time with that obstacle at all. Now, bear with me. Like I said, I'm deliberately misunderstanding the metaphor so that we can pick it apart a little. But I want to think for a moment, think for yourself for a second. When was the last time being motivated by efficiency helped you to create and maintain a new relationship with an actual human? I'm going to assume that for the vast majority of you, being motivated by efficiency hasn't helped you build relationship. So what about boulevards? Let's continue the metaphor for a moment. What are the characteristics when you think of a boulevard in your neighborhood, or you think about what you think a boulevard should look like? What are the characteristics? Again, shout out, unmute.
Wide open.
Open, yeah.
To go through things.
Mm-hmm.
Tree lined.
Tree lined, yes. Nice mature boulevard with older trees.
There's a space between 2 directions, one going one way and one the other, but you can cross over. There's not a barrier.
Yeah, that's great. So when I think of a boulevard, and I did some Googling of pictures because we all know Google is the best resource we have available to us. The main characteristics that I saw was, like you said, wide space. It's a space that is wider than the average road intentionally, and often it's shared by both cars and bikes and pedestrians. It's designed to accommodate lots of different types of transportation. Often it's a combination of retail and residential, so it's mixed use spaces along the sides. Often there's slower speed limits and a focus on neighborhood building, so the space is intentionally meant to bring you in to a neighborhood rather than bypass. And like some friends said, there's more green space often mixed in. So you see bushes or trees or things down the middle. There's green space intentionally included. Dictionary.com, which again is the ultimate authority on many, many things that I don't know, defines it as a broad avenue in a city, usually having area at the sides or center for trees, grass, or flowers. So if we're going to keep going down this wonderful metaphor, and I promise this won't all be metaphors, where do you think I'm going with this change up? Why do you think I would suggest a boulevard instead of a bridge? Again, shout out your thoughts.
No one is
That
left
was no
behind.
one's left behind. More interaction.
Yeah.
I'll say meet in the middle.
Okay.
More nature.
It's always a bonus. Yeah. Anyone online? Any thoughts about why we would build a boulevard instead of a bridge?
They're safer.
Yeah.
Difficult to turn around when you're on a bridge.
That's true. That's true. You're stuck on the one way direction if you need to.
Do a U-turn.
It's probably less costly than building a bridge.
But what do you do about the water?
It's true.
Good question.
That's true. So like I said, none of these metaphors are perfect. You know, sometimes you do have to deal with the obstacle in front of you. And if that obstacle is water. But when we're talking metaphors here, I think you get generally where I'm going, which is wonderful. What if we thought about connecting with people who are different from us, from the holistic process of engaging in a variety of spaces and viewing obstacles as a natural speed deterrent, an internal way for us to slow down and focus on the depth and the nuance of a relationship and the building of that relationship. So we're not passing over the obstacle, we're sitting with it and going through it together and finding natural ways to engage. I believe back in Matt, my coworker, who you guys would have, many of you would have been on the call for back in October, spoke at your church. And he spoke on polarization. And I know that he had talked to you a little bit, some of the studies on polarization. And studies have found no less than 57 different causes for polarization. And most studies claim that their cause is the most likely. So you can see the problem when we talk about how to address polarization is there's about 57 different people, major studies out there that claim to have the answer and the reason for polarization. And often they just are all in different directions. And so it's hard to focus. Matt might have also told you about decades of research in a small town in Framingham, Massachusetts. And that research telling us about how the relationships that we have with those around us, even to the third degree of separation, I believe, is the number one indicator of how we feel about the world and ourselves on any given day. So if somebody who is 3 degrees of separation removed from you in your friendship is having a positive outlook on life and experiencing positive things, you are going to be directly impacted to a varying level of degree the closer it gets to you by that positivity or that positive outcome. And so it's fascinating. It's really confusing because it's hard to kind of plot out, but it's really solid research that has happened over decades of the same people following in a town and seeing how they interact with each other and engage with each other. And so if we're so affected by the people around us, then that's what we have to work with when we're dealing with polarization is we have to go to the people around us. And now it's more than just making friendships. You know, I could read you a book that my 3-year-old likes about how to make friends. And it'll tell you probably about finding shared interests and how to compromise and the importance of sharing our toys. But I don't think you need that because I'm assuming that most of you hopefully have friends and have made a friendship in the past, and so know what that looks like, what the process is to make a new friend. That means that what you're probably actually looking for is not about how to make friends with new people, but how to build relationships or friendships with people who are probably far more different than you ideologically. Because those friendships and relationships, in there, you will probably disagree and disagree a lot. And most children's books don't tell you about how to deal with the people that you disagree with constantly. A recent study from Simon Fraser University found that there was no room for nuance in a polarized political climate. So if we were to take that for the case, we can reverse engineer and we say, perhaps then the solution to polarization, if we were to offer one, is to make room for more nuance in our lives. That nuance is then the enemy of polarization. And for us to have meaningful and nonviolent in our conversation interactions with people who think very differently from us, which honestly is a very hard thing to do. I am not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that this is simple or easy, especially when you've got that uncle who has no filter and a lot of political opinions who turns up to family holidays. Easter is coming. And so, 20 minutes is really not enough time to go deeply onto this topic, but at Canadian Friends Service Committee, we've developed a series of 52 tips that Matt might have told you about that have been developed for us to practice our communication skills with difficult conversations, specifically thinking about how we talk to and engage with the person at the cafe or online or at our dinner table or as we're interacting in the world, who have just very, very different or conflicting perspectives to your own. And I thought I would just take a moment and walk through 4 of them together that I think are relevant, and then encourage you to reach out for more of those tips and those skills, because this goes beyond, like I said, this is not our traditional friendship building skills that we learned in primary school. This is a new skill set that we have to work on, and that deals with being really comfortable with the obstacles, getting comfortable with walking down the boulevard and bumping into people and having ongoing relationships with them, not just one-off debates. So the first thing I want to encourage us to do is to get closer and more vulnerable, adding that nuance to both your identity and to theirs. Make room for that. Studies have shown that when we encounter someone who we believe to be different from us, our unconscious mind or implicit bias takes over. These assumptions and biases increase the less we know about the person. So the less we know, the more likely our biases and assumptions go into overdrive. This is a natural state of our brain. It's not your fault. It's not something to be sad or angry at yourself about. It's just how our brains work. And so if we know that, then we can add to nuance and we can try and get to know deeper. And this is where that quote from Brene Brown that I encouraged you all to read and think about comes. It's really hard to hate people up close. That's just a fact. That's actually a concluded studied thing, that the closer we are to people and the more we know about them, the harder it is to be like, yeah, you know what? They don't deserve drinking water, like we heard earlier. Or yeah, you know what? No, they're precluded. I think they're okay to shoot. It's very difficult to make that assessment when we get to know our humans up close. So when we're getting to know someone and we want them to be vulnerable, and so that we can add nuance to their identity, we're asking a lot, and we have to set that example first. So in the spirit of that, here's some things about me that can help you understand how we can add nuance to our identities. So I am a strong believer in housing as a human right and a voter and pro rent control. And I am also a landlord. We own a duplex here in St. John and we rent out one of our units. I am both of those things. As a member of the queer community, I have also experienced traumatizing conversion therapy in my life. And I am still a person of faith, and I believe that having faith in my life adds important thing for me. Those things often are separated, but we're adding nuance by saying and. There's both and here. And, which for many of you I see in the room probably can identify with this statement, my inherent privilege as a middle-ish class, white, cis-passing human means that I would personally benefit from a lot of pro-nationalist and conservative government policies. And I am still choosing to fight for economic policies that would not benefit me directly. These are ways that we can add conversation and nuance to our people that we're talking with. When we identify the conflicting part of ourselves that might be seen as a polar opposite, and see that they can identify and live within the same person, we add nuance and we also add vulnerability. And that might encourage the person across from us to also be bold enough and vulnerable enough to add nuance to their own selves. The second tip that I have for you today is about being safe. Do your best to help a person feel safe in a conversation. If you're having a conversation with someone and the reaction is really intense, and it's likely that the person feels threatened for some reason, even if you're doing your best not to threaten them and you don't understand why, sometimes we feel threatened. We know from the field of neuroscience that words can trigger pain as severe as that from being physically attacked. They've done studies on our pain response, and words can feel literally like sticks and stones. And so that song is not very good anymore because they can actually genuinely hurt us and make us feel the pain that a physical. We are really social beings, and at our root, in our biology, we are designed to care deeply about being in good standing within our groups, because that's how you protect in a herd, you know? And these things help explain why someone who is experiencing a threat to their self or their status within a social group, that runs the risk of bringing out a really intense response. Our brains statistically are not good at telling the difference between a bear attack and something that significantly challenges our worldview. Truly. The signals that go off in our brain when we are running from a bear are so surprisingly similar and identical to the signals that happen in our brain when we are feeling like our worldview or our social understanding is challenged or threatened. It's really hard then for us to hear what's being said, to engage meaningfully or in constructive ways. Instead, our brain goes into this default defensive mode, and we cling to current beliefs and habits as their shields, as if they're shields to protect us from that bear. So to transform relationships, you want openness, both on your part and the other person's. So helping a person to feel that you genuinely care about them, have their best interests at heart, is going to help. The key here is it has to be true. People know if you're being insincere. And so you have to make sure that you are being genuinely sincere. And this is very difficult. This is incredibly difficult. If you got me an interview with President Trump right now and I had to do this, it would be really hard to feel like I was being 100% sincere. But that's the personal work within me that I have to do to make sure that I'm ready to build a boulevard and to actually engage with people that are so far on the other spectrum from what I understand. Tip number 3 is be less clever. We are so good at analyzing and deconstructing people and situations. Many of us have learned those skills either through our education system or as a trauma response to needing to understand the world around us and gauge people's reactions and intentions and all sorts of different things. This is just part of how we develop as humans. But the problem is sometimes we go too far with it. Sometimes we might give someone a mental health diagnosis. So we hear someone doing something and we go, oh, she's clearly a narcissist. Or obviously he's a neo-Nazi sociopath. And we make these labels. We might pick apart their ideas and apply really far-reaching labels that generalize. Well, oh, he's just speaking from his ableist privilege. Or she's just being childish and naive and they don't understand how the world really works. And here's the thing. your diagnosis might be accurate. Maybe you're an actual medical doctor and a psychologist and have the ability to diagnose. Maybe you don't, but you have just a really good guess. It doesn't matter. The function of that process of analyzing, deconstructing people is to make you feel more in power and in control while distancing yourself from the other person. Those labels do nothing but make you feel probably a little bit superior, or you've won some votes because you're not a narcissist, of course, and you're not acting out of a place of privilege. And so it helps you feel separated from that person. It doesn't bring you closer, it actually pushes you away. And this, again, is just not useful if you're serious about trying to transform your conflict and engage in more nuanced and depth of relationship. Try to get out of the over-analysis trap and just try and feel closer. Find things in common with the person and try to speak in a language that is highlighting where you may have the sameness rather than highlighting how you are better or different, even if it's in your own head. Trying to do that here is actually going to help you be able to do that out loud. The last thing is to remember that conflicts are okay. Conflict is not a failing. It's just a normal part of life. When you're walking down that boulevard that you're building, you're going to get in those funny situations where you're on the sidewalk and you're going one way and the other person's going the other way, and you do that little dance to figure out which way the person is going, and you laugh and then you carry on. Conflicts can be like that. They don't have to be world altering. They're just part of life. You're going to come in contact with people and you're not going to know, and you're going to have to do the little dance. But we can often feel so embarrassed to be in conflict, or we can see them as bad or as that we're failing. And honestly, I think probably everybody in this room, both virtually and online, can say that often conflict is unpleasant. It's not a great feeling. We want to wrap them up and move on as soon as we can, but it doesn't work. Being too quick to settle. Don't be too quick to settle. If having a good relationship with the person across from you matters to you, don't go for a quick compromise or a solution where one party wins at the other party's expense. This can be counterproductive to how we're taught now, or to think about that uncle at the table. You can either think, either I'm going to debate him until he goes away, or I'm just going to go, yeah, and avoid that conflict. But there's something in the middle there about having a deep, engaging conversation. This is the problem with bridges. This is why I said we don't want to go over the obstacle and skip it. We want to engage with it. Don't be too fast to move out of the discomfort. If you're feeling uneasy and the situation seems like it hasn't been positively addressed, find ways to keep talking about it. But when either of you needs to, take a break. But try to agree that you're going to come back to the conversation later, not in a sense of wanting to win, but making sure that you are both fully heard in the process. Remember, bridges can be efficient, but sometimes they allow us to move too quickly past an obstacle of our discomfort. Building a boulevard then forces us to slow down and engage with that obstacle. Here in our city in St. John recently, we've had some road improvements that have caused quite an uproar online in our city center. And they've done some things where they've added bike lanes, and they've changed the shape of some of the curbs, and they've done some things. And talking to someone who plans at our city, I know that they did those intentionally to slow down traffic. They didn't make it more efficient for cars. They made it less efficient for cars intentionally so that people would slow down and be aware of pedestrians. We need that in our life. We need the signals, we need the curbs, we need the extra trees, we need the extra things in our life to remind us to slow down and think about where we are in this moment and engage with the person in front of us. In some of the things I sent to Annie for some inspiration pieces on this top, I included a video that I would love for you all to watch and really engage with. It was a really challenging, probably one of the most challenging videos I have watched recently, that it was well articulated, that I think is a really great follow-up to this conversation. And is challenging for our community at the moment. And it's about how we do relationship building and the hard work of advocacy in our own families, cultures, and privileges. It's from a wonderful content creator that does a series of videos called Smarter in Seconds, and she's a Black American, and she talks about the reality of of needing to do the work within our own spaces and needing each people within their own privilege groups, of whatever that looks like, to do the work internally and to have those hard conversations and to learn the nuance and to learn how to talk to people in our own spaces, because that's the only way we're going to kind of move forward as a society. I really encourage you to watch it, sit with it, feel the discomfort potentially that comes up from within you in it, and hold on to that discomfort and let it just kind of simmer within you. I see that we've gone quite through for timing on everything. And so I am going to wrap up, but I also want to encourage you. We have some resources at our organization, Canadian Friends Service Committee. One is the 52 tip series, one for every week of the year. This is currently being published on all of our social media channels, but you can also just get the list and work on them together as a community. And it's one tip per week, because the idea is that you can read it all, but it's overwhelming. There's no way to enact and to practice. This practice is part of the skill building. And so it's meant to be a digestible chunk, a little tip each week for you to practice in your daily conversations and relationships with your partners, your friends, people around you, so that you're better at it when it comes to harder situations and with people that are more challenging. Secondly, as you know, we are now in election season, and we talked earlier today, I heard, I think it was Chris, say something to the effect of, what if we saw the lens of the small child in front of us every time we had to make a policy decision? CFSE has recently produced an election toolkit with that in mind, thinking about a peace lens on our politics, and thinking about what does it look like to ask our MPs and our candidates for this next election questions that have a peace lens to them, and that are going to get to the heart of structural peace within Canada, not just physical peace of not being actively at war. So I just encourage you, if you want to take advantage of those resources, I can send more links to them to the admin team at West Hill, and they can send those out, so you can have a look at them. I know that you're from around the world, and so I also want to encourage you that, as we often in Canada are overwhelmed by the news to the south of our border, it can distract us from what's happening in our own countries. And so my final thing is, a boulevard is a neighborhood. I encourage you to spend less time looking at the news from around the world and more time thinking about what's happening in your neighborhood, and how the things that are happening around the world is very possible to happen in your own backyard if you are not actively in there and engaging. Thank you. And I open it up for conversation and questions.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.